Hello, my friends. I am Chevee. Welcome to my shed. How are you doing today? How's life in your world? How's things where you are? I hope everything is good and great and wonderful and kind and beautiful. It's getting ready to thunderstorm here, so I'm hoping to get this done before all that starts because sometimes my power goes out. And today I have another, I guess, review. I don't know, a discussion about something that I purchased on Amazon. And that is the book by Robert C. Martin called Clean Code, A Handbook of Agile Software Craftsmanship. I got some questions about this book when I mentioned it, and I want to talk a little bit about it. But up front, I have not finished the book. I'm about halfway through the book. And so far, spoiler alert, so far, this was probably the best book I've ever read on programming. Period. It's really changed my mind about a lot of things. This book was recommended to me because of a friend, he's a friend, a coworker who I was talking to about the No Rogues Allowed project, and he said, and I was talking to him about my code structure and design, and he said, you know, check out this book. And I guess he had this book in college, and he enjoyed it, and so I bought it, and like I said earlier, I think that this book is really made me think long and hard about a lot of things. One of the arguments against this book that I've seen is that it's dated. It's Java, almost exclusively Java-based. It's got a whole lot of concepts that don't really fit into modern design practices. But I completely disagree with all of that. Number one, yes, it's Java. All of the code in here that I have seen so far, besides a couple little examples of like Hungarian notation and old concepts, all of the code is in Java, but the code in here is not code that you're supposed to run. It's not teaching you how to write a function that does X. It's just a representation of code that looks bad, and then let's clean it and see what it looks like after that. And so it doesn't matter what language it is, I think, for the most part. I mean, there are obviously, Java constructs in here that aren't in other languages that might be confusing, but you can easily Google those. And for the most part, the author does a really good job of explaining them so you don't have to. Because again, the code is not the point of the book. The book is all about the structure. It's all about the main focus of this book is that you spend more time reading code than you do writing code. Regardless of whether you believe that or not, the truth is you read your own code way more than you write code, because every time you want to write something new, you have to go reread what you've already done to figure out how to put in the new thing. You read way more code than you write. So if you make code easy to read, that's good code, right? That's what it's all about. And it's really changed my mind about a whole lot of things. It's really opened my eyes to a whole lot of techniques that I've not used, like constants. I don't use constants ever. Meaning that I use constants all the time, but I don't define them. I don't declare them. I just use the number, 5. Well, how do you search for that? Go try to grep 5. Go try to search for 5 in your code. It's impossible. And it's just something that simple. Like, well, you should have just defined a constant and used the constant variable name so that you can easily go find it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, even if for a single instance, even if it's just one time, you use the number 5 in a conditional, make it a constant so that you can search for it later. Makes a lot of sense. Stuff like that, right? So I think it's a really good book, and part of the reason that this came up today in specific is I've spent the last 3 days rewriting the majority of the back end of No Rogues Allowed. As I started on it, I started with weapons, and so I wrote a function that built weapons. And weapons had a specific set of categories. Enchantments, prefixes, the name of the weapon, whether it has an adjective attached to an abstract noun or just an abstract noun, bonuses, that sort of stuff. So I stepped through each of those portions, and I decide whether the weapon's going to get that or not, and then out comes a weapon. And it worked, and it was fine. It was clean. It was okay. The code had a little bit of repetition in it because for each of those steps, I was just checking to see if things, if a conditional was met, roll a D100, and see if 50% of weapons will have this, and then if that was the case, I would go grab a thing out of the database. And so every time I did that, there was some repetition, but if you're reading it top to bottom, theoretically, it made sense. So in that case, I don't mind having some repetition, because it's like, I'm doing this. If that happens, I get this. If not, we go down and we keep going, right? But the problem came when I added shields. Well, when I added shields, or armor. When I added armor is slightly different than weapons. Armor is more about the material that the armor is made out of and not about the base weapon. You know, weapons are based on the weapon. That's the basis for everything. Armor is based on the material, not the type of armor. And so I took that whole weapon function and recreated it, but switching things around because armor was different. And then when it came to shields were also different from armor, but not dramatically, but enough that I was like, I'll just copy and paste. And so at the end of it all, I had 3 generation routines that were largely similar, but they had these little intricacies that made them different. And it was bad. It was kind of a nightmare. And before I got to the next part of adding another item type, I decided to refactor all of that into one function that does all of it. And I have that now, and it works. It works, I think. I have not sat with a calculator and tried to really follow along with what it's doing and make sure the math all checks out, but I think it works. And it took me 3 days. It took me 3 days to fix it. Now, does that mean that everything I did before was wasted? No. As I've said in the articles, if you've read the articles about the project, I'm sketching. Like, a lot of the code that I've shown is just rough sketches. It's just, I'm taking notes, essentially, but I'm doing it with code, and I'm running it to see what happens. And once I get the outcome that I want, then I can take that code and refine it. And that's a lot of the time the way that I do things when it comes to programming or when it comes to game design, or in this instance, both. I'm doing both at the same time. You know, I can't necessarily do that with wood. If I'm building a headboard for my daughter, I can't slap one together and then fix it later. I can't do that, but with code, I can. And I treat it a little bit like writing a book. I just write it, and then I'll go back and fix it. And sometimes that's painful. Sometimes the fixing is grueling. And in this particular instance, it's rough. And there's still more to go. I tore all of those functions apart and put them back together into one, but there's still a whole lot of repetition in there that I can abstract out and make it better. And last night I shared it with a friend. I have a friend who is he's a contractor for the government, and he is an, real software developer, not a self-taught person like me. And I gave him the keys to my GitHub to let him see what I've done, and his response was, well, there's some mess in here. And he's right, and I know he's right, but the problem is I've never really had a mentorship with anybody who could say, take this apart and fix it, because this is ugly. Or this can be done way better if you just do this. And there's a whole lot of pieces like that. There's specific pieces that I've just left because it was too hard for me to figure out how to fix it. I know for a fact there's a way to do what I'm attempting to do with one line of code, probably, to fix a mathematical problem. Instead, I couldn't figure it out, so I just did it the way that I knew how to do it, and used a switch case and just screw it. We'll just fudge it, and that sucks. I don't like that. So there's a whole lot going on with this whole refactoring thing, and it's always grueling. But the good news is, me, knowing myself, I have not lost interest over the last 3 days. It's taken me a lot of work to turn all of that back into something that I can look at now and go, all right, now let's take this and boil it down, break it down, turn it into usable code. And I haven't lost my focus. I haven't lost my excitement for the project as a whole. In fact, after doing all of that, I added the next item type, which means that now the function is complete. It does all 4 of the things that I want it to do. Now I can take it, break it apart, put it back together with better logic and, not so much junk. And that's thanks to this book, a lot of it. I mean, some of it is just, I know that the code that I wrote was ugly and bad, and it required a whole lot of flipping back and forth, and I don't like that. So I just fix it. So if you've been thinking about clean code, if you're a developer or if you want to be a developer, I think this book could be used by anybody at any skill level in programming. Even if you've never done it, reading this book can really open your eyes to how it's done. Yeah, I would even argue that this would be a wonderful book for people who manage software developers but who aren't software developers themselves. I think there's a lot of insight in here into why management pressure can be really bad. Not saying that managers should never pressure. I'm saying that that pressure can manifest into a developer who's unwilling to argue for good and just accepts the bad. That's my 2 cents. I'll leave a link in the description. If you use that link, it's an Amazon affiliate link. I'll get a little kickback. So, thank you. Thank you for being here as always. Thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing, being amazing friends, and wonderful people. I really appreciate you, and I will see you tomorrow. Today's word you should know is basilisk. It is a noun meaning a mythical reptile with a lethal stare or breath. With poisonous saliva that can kill a man with one bite, the Komodo dragon is truly a modern-day basilisk. B-A-S-I-L-I-S-K.